Welcome to Season 1, Episode 2 of the American Holocaust series, Policed Since 1492, Incarceration of Native Nations, created and co-hosted by Janelle Romero. Janelle Romero is Mescalero Chiricahua, Apache, Dene, Paiute, and Spanish Sephardic, a relative of Pawnee, Powaki, Southern Ute, Lakota, and Haudenosaunee, a humanitarian, the founder, president, and CEO of Red Nation Celebration Institute, Red Nation International Film Festival, Native Women in Film, Red Nation Television Network. Janelle is an actor best known for her performances in Powwow Highway and The Girl Called Hatter Fox. She's also a filmmaker shortlisted for an Academy Award. Janelle coined hashtag Natives in Charge of Their Narrative and hashtag Why We Wear Red. Janelle built the Red Nation Celebration Institute, now in its 25th year, to cast light on the voices, stories, and contributions of contemporary Native peoples to replace dangerous stereotypes that Native peoples face in media and academia. Founded in 1995 in Santa Fe, New Mexico during Indian Market, RNCI is the first and largest national Native-led enterprise and the longest-standing American Indian and Indigenous multidisciplinary educational, arts, and cultural federally recognized 501c3 nonprofit organization. We are coming to you live from Los Angeles, California, traditional territories of the Tongva and Chumash, and home to the largest urban population of Native peoples.
Hello, everyone, and I want to thank you all for joining us live here today. We're here again to invite you to be part of this very important conversation. RNCI is spearheading this momentum of healing through understanding, using our lens of film and conversation. In order for us to mend humanity, we need to address what's happened and still is happening to our Native peoples here in Indian Country, America. It is in the spirit of resilience and unification that we hold hands together while this historic sacred moment leads us into the truth. I'd like to share a quote from Martin Luther King. Our nation was born in genocide when it embraced the doctrine that the original American, the Indian, was an inferior race. Even before there were large numbers of Negroes on our shore, the scar of racial hatred had already disfigured colonial society. From the 16th century forward, blood flowed in battles over racial supremacy. We are perhaps the only nation which tried as a matter of national policy to wipe out its indigenous population. Moreover, we elevated that tragic experience into a noble crusade. Indeed, even today, we have not permitted ourselves to reject or feel remorse for this shameful episode. Our literature, our films, our drama, our folklore, all exalt it. Our children are still taught to respect the violence which reduced a red-skinned people of an earlier culture into a few fragmented groups herded into the impoverished reservations. Martin Luther King. I'd like to introduce my co-host for this episode, Shauna Blue Star Newcomb. Shauna reveals hidden history behind the roots of the current ecological, social, political, and economic crisis related to the domination code, and collaborates with her father, Stephen Newcomb, on a global movement for conscious change. She works at the intersection of social justice, spirituality, personal transformation, and holistic wellness. She carries a vision of helping free people from grief and suffering and is an advocate empowering women. She is a powerful resource supporting people all around the world with her healing and intuitive guidance sessions. Shauna is the creator of the online course, The Relevance Code Reset, based on ancient and indigenous knowledge, to help people navigate the rapidly changing world and find greater peace of mind, joy, and purpose. She brings profound spiritual messages that have opened hearts and minds internationally and is dedicated to the collective well-being of all people, the planet, and future generations. Let's welcome Shauna. Thank you, Shauna, for being with us today and co-hosting with me.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great pleasure to be here with you, and thank you all of you for tuning in to this incredible event today. To start off, we're going to watch a trailer for a documentary that is coming soon, which will provide some historical context for our conversation today. And we'll look forward to meeting all of our panelists when we come back. Thank you.
We need a mental and behavioral shift away from the prevailing paradigm of domination and dehumanization, the symptoms of which are everywhere on planet Earth, our mother. More than 5 centuries ago, various popes in Rome, on behalf of Christendom, unleashed the paradigm I'm talking about. It may surprise you to learn that the empire domination model of Christianity was woven by jurists into the laws and policies of the United States and into the laws and policies of other countries such as Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. That hidden code of Christian empire has worked for more than 5 centuries toward the dissolution of our original nations and peoples, here on Great Turtle Island and Abiyala to the south.
The sooner we get that straight in our head, the sooner we'll get our land back, or else they're going to keep on killing us.
The idea patterns of domination and so-called Christian discovery have been incorporated into U.S. federal Indian law, where they remain to this day. Those ideas are traced to Vatican documents of the 15th century and to royal charters of England, which declared the right of Christian people to discover the lands of heathens and infidels and to assume a right of domination or subjugation against the nations and peoples of those places. In 1823, Chief Justice John Marshall, on behalf of the United States Supreme Court, wrote that doctrine into U.S. case law, where it remains to this day. We can trace the pattern back to 1452 and the bull Dum Diversus, issued by Pope Nicholas V to King Alfonso of Portugal. It instructed the king to go to the western coast of Africa and to non-Christian lands everywhere, and to invade, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, pagans, and other enemies of Christ, to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to take away all their possessions and property. That was repeated in 1493, shortly after Cristobal Colon sailed across the ocean to what is now called the Caribbean and claimed possession of our original lands on behalf of the Spanish crown. In 1954, the U.S. Justice Department delivered a legal brief to the U.S. Supreme Court in the case Tehitan Indians versus the United States. And the main argument of the Justice Department was that the Tehitan people in Alaska did not deserve monetary compensation for a taking of their timber because, quote, the Christian nations of Europe had discovered the lands of heathens and infidels. And the U.S. Supreme Court in 1955 upheld that, the same year I was born, and cited to Henry Wheaton's Elements of International Law which referenced all the things I'm talking about. And among the other things that Wheaton said was this: the heathen nations of the other quarters of the globe were the lawful spoil and prey of their civilized conquerors. This was upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court as recently as 2005 in the case City of Sherrill versus Oneida Indian Nation of New York. I want to conclude by saying that it is time for Christians and the churches that are doing so to stop lying about our ceremonies. They need to stop telling our young people and others that our ceremonies are satanic or the work of the devil. This is killing many of our young people who, deprived of their cultural and spiritual identity in the wake of the domination of the residential and boarding schools, are ending their lives prematurely. Additionally, the governments and the churches need to start putting as much time, effort, and energy into assisting with the revitalization of our languages, cultures, and spiritual traditions and our sacred places as they put into attempting to destroy them to begin with. Our original nations don't need reconciliation, we need decolonization. We and the planet need healing from the trauma brought on by chronic and ongoing domination. Decolonization.
Welcome back, everyone. And that was a documentary that allows us to really lay the groundwork for our conversation today. I'd like to welcome our panelists who are all trailblazers in their own right. Stephen Newcomb, who you saw featured in the trailer earlier, Joe DeGowdy, Crystal Tubles, and Eric Bringswhite. We're all looking forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you.
Yes, thank all of you so much for being here. Before we hear from everyone, I just want to speak to the women that you saw at the very end of this trailer. There's a saying in Indian country: a nation is not conquered until the hearts of its women are on the ground. Then it's finished, no matter how brave its warriors or how strong their weapons. And we have, as life givers, we have, this sacred gift. And there's many missing and Indigenous women, which will be in our next episode. But we need to always include our life givers in everything that we do. Okay, so let's start the show with our panelists. I'm going to introduce you to someone that I respect very, very much. Living with that footage of Stephen Newcomb and the work and the legacy that he has given to all of us, to all of humanity, to have forever. It's in writing, it's in film. So he's dedicated his life to the doctrine of discovery and the whole history. And it's very complicated and it's very detailed. And 1 hour can't even get into it as, like we should. So that's why there's movies and conversations like this to introduce you, the audience, who may not have any idea about the doctrine of discovery or how it came about. So we're going to take you into baby steps. but you're going to meet one of the leaders in this whole, I don't want to say movement, in this whole legacy of what's happened to our indigenous peoples. Stephen Newcomb co-founded the Indigenous Law Institute in 1992 with Virgil Killstraight, who was a traditional headman and ceremonial leader of the Oglala Lakota Nation. Newcomb is recognized as one of the world's foremost authorities on the doctrine of discovery. He has published several law review articles on the subject, and his book, Pagans in the Promised Land, Decoding the Doctrine of Christian Discovery, has been a bestseller on Amazon. He is the co-producer of the documentary movie, The Doctrine of Discovery, Unmasking the Domination Code, directed by Sheldon Wolfchild, which is based on the Pagans in the Promised Land. I'd like for all of you to meet one of my dear friends, Stephen Newcomb. Stephen,
Janelle,
welcome to the show.
thank you. Good to be here. Opportunity, yes.
Yeah. So we're going to ask you a few questions, and just feel free to take it where you need to take it.
Well, let me jump in because I know what you're attempting to ask, I believe, which is before 1492.
Mm-hmm.
If we think of 1491 and prior, going all the way back, the way I like to set the context for any dialogue or discussion about these types of matters is by acknowledging that all of our nations and peoples throughout what is now called North America, or throughout the Western Hemisphere, is our original free and independent existence, extending back to the beginning of time through our oral histories and traditions. And in that scope of an expansive era of eons, of ages, our ancestors evolved languages and cultures and spiritual traditions, child rearing practices, the ways in which we would interact responsibly with ecosystems within our traditional territories. And we can think of all of the knowledge and wisdom accumulated over such an amazing period of time, however you want to think about that time. And we could get into that discussion. But the point being that if you look at a book such as Indian Givers by Jack Weatherford, you see this amazing array of knowledge and wisdom and understanding, scientific understandings of plant knowledge, of ways to work with ecological systems to sustain and maintain them based upon our original instructions. And those instructions and our languages have encoded within them the behavioral patterns and patterns of thought that are designed to maintain our ecosystems forever, that is, for all future generations. And so when we look at that wide array of nations and peoples all through the whole hemisphere, we see that amazing legacy that the world has not been able to adequately benefit from, because the contrast with that original free and independent existence is the domination system that was brought by ship from the monarchies of what was called Western Christendom back in the 15th, 16th, and later centuries. So that's how I set the context for a discussion such as this one.
Well, I'd really like to address this. What is the connection between the incarceration of Native nations and the ceremonial acts of possessions conducted in North America by Western Christendom?
Right, Christendom. So
what a word.
Isn't that something? Yeah. DOM on the end is domain. It's related to dominion, domination. There's a whole terms that we could get into, but the more important point that your question is getting at is the idea of incarceration of entire nations of peoples. So the theme that you're talking about is policed since 1492, incarceration of Native nations. Why are we saying something like that? Well, For one thing, the idea of police and the idea of incarceration has to do with the claim of jurisdiction. And those monarchies sent their representatives across the ocean with various documents, such as the John Cabot Charter, Sir Walter Raleigh, Sir Humphrey Gilbert, many charters or royal edicts or documents that are actually modeled after the Vatican documents of the 15th century in the short clip that you showed, that we mentioned in the short clip that you showed. And that has to do with a claim of jurisdiction. Now, the word jurisdiction has to do, it's connected to the word dungeon and danger, because it's always dangerous to be considered subject to the will of someone else against your own will. And when they came over here, the idea was that they had the right to go wherever there were non-Christians existing and to establish and claim for themselves a right of domination over those places. And the toehold, the initial event that they would put into motion, was to engage in ceremonies to pile up stones or to break a branch or tear up some grass or hold some soil in their hand, that type of thing. And when they held the soil in their hand, that was representative symbolically of all of the vast areas of land that they were looking at for the first time. And they would generally do this at the mouth of a river, because the idea was that according to their rules back in Christendom, whoever arrived at a massive geographical area at the mouth of a river was supposedly entitled, according to their own rules, to claim all of that all the way to the source of that river with all the tributaries. And so they engaged in these acts and put up symbols. And so when Columbus went to the various islands in the Caribbean, just to illustrate this, he erected two symbols. One was the symbol of a gallows with 13 nooses to hang Indians, and the number 13 corresponding to Jesus and the 12 apostles. And that symbol was of jurisdiction. They were claiming the right of domination in that place as a claim using the word jurisdiction, to speak the law, juris and diction. And then also the second symbol was that of the cross, to represent what they consider to be the Catholic faith and Christian religion. So when you tie that back to the Vatican papal bulls and you go into the Latin and the English and you get into the very deep nuance of that, what you see is the overall system, a cognitive, mental, and behavioral system of domination and dehumanization, of subordination that was brought all over here and taken to other parts of the globe, and that has now encompassed the entire globe. So it's in this sense that I think of our native nations as being incarcerated within that conceptual and behavioral system.
Wow. Yeah. So, Stephen, if you can speak on the English words and what that implies to us today of dehumanization, domination, and how that applies to what's happening with us today. Like on the recent Oklahoma case, and what happened. We'll have Crystal share about the Mount Rushmore, but like even what happened with Standing Rock.
Well, let me continue on with the context.
Yeah.
Connect the context to your question.
Okay.
The context of the federal Indian law system is the use of those ancient documents that I mentioned in a U.S. Supreme Court ruling from 1823 called Johnson versus McIntosh. And without getting into all the details of the case and so forth, it was a property case. And the main way in which the court expressed itself is to say that the first Europeans or the first Christian people, that's a direct quote, Christian people, to locate lands inhabited by natives who were heathens, that's another direct quote, had the right to assume the ultimate dominion, meaning a right of domination to be in themselves, that is existing in themselves in relation to our ancestors or to our native nations and peoples. So those patterns of domination in that decision form the context for every single situation you can think of, all of the various acts of Congress, all of the various decisions of the Supreme Court, the ways in which they wrongly interpret our treaties against our interests, but in favor of their own interests, the way in which they help themselves to trillions of dollars in economic development based upon the overrunning of our lands and territories and our waters and so forth, helping themselves to basically everything. That is all created by means of this context of the claim of a right of domination, which is also tied into the Old Testament narrative of the chosen people in the promised land. That's an additional element or part of the framework that needs to be acknowledged as well. So whether you're talking about murdered and missing Indigenous women, you're talking about the horrible health statistics within our communities, you're talking about the economics of the poverty, the diabetes rates, all those types of things. Those are all a direct consequence, in my view, of a legacy of more than 2 centuries, but also more than 5 centuries when you think of the overall history of domination and dehumanization. Let me add one last thing here to that comment. In the state of California, I happen to be in the Kumeyaay Nation territory at the moment. In the state of California in 1930, there was a decision, the California Supreme Court said that the only thing existing in California before the Spaniards arrived with their colonization was a state of barbarism, which means that that's a non-human existence. So they're saying that the native people existing here were not human, they were barbarians. And so then if you think about that, so how do you become a human if you're not a human when they get here, according to their norms? The only way you can become a human is by being forced under their domination system, baptized, subjected to the mission systems, which resulted in the deaths of more than 150,000 Native people within a very short period of time, some 65 years or so. And then you're under that domination system, so then you cry out for human rights. So the whole thing is very convoluted because those human rights are not able to really provide you with the redress that you're looking for, because in order to be considered human, you had to be forced under the domination system to begin with. These are the kinds of nuances that have seldom been examined, and I'm just barely touching the highlights of the overall situation that our nations and peoples face under a system of incarceration.
You know, we titled this conversation, Policed Since 1492, Incarceration of Native Nations. And Stephen, you helped with that. And because, you know, Geronimo took the first knee, and we have been policed since 1492. And, you know, when I share about the doctrine of discovery, and I share your work with others that really don't know, I'm really challenged. And they ask me, you know, you're lying, this is not true, this can't be, it's your imagination. You know, they say so many things to me, and I just have to you know, go do your research, go read, you know, Stephen Newcomb's book and other books. How can you help me maybe address that, like when someone completely denies the history?
Well, it's sort of like, as I said to Archbishop Silvano Tomasi at the Vatican in 2016, I was there with Joe De Gaudi and a number of other indigenous peoples delegates. And I said to Archbishop Silvano Tomasi, with respect, I believe there's much of your own history you don't know. Let me ask you, have you ever actually read the papal bulls? And he said, no, I must confess. And I said, that's okay. But I've been reading those documents in Latin and English since 1989. So I think I know a little something about them. And then I began to explain the Latin and the English. The problem with the American people and people in many other places is they simply don't know the history, not the nuanced, detailed history that I'm talking about. And so they've been handicapped in that manner. And so when we begin to bring forward the actual information, chapter and verse, the documents, unless they can make those documents go away, then they pretty much have to concede the point that when I can show that, yes, indeed, the Supreme Court did say Christian people, and yes, indeed, the court did say natives who were heathens, and then we can point out that that's directly out of the Bible, that the word heathen is a word of Christian origin, according to Oxford English Dictionary, and so forth and so on. When we provide them with all of this detail of more than 40 years of research, then it's pretty irrefutable. And the difficulty is that we need to be more effective in getting the word out. And I've worked with my friend Peter Dorico we've had a 30-year conversation, and from 1992 until his passing on February 10th of 2019, I had the great honor of working with my friend and mentor Virgil Killstraight. And I was thinking about him this evening and thinking how remarkable that he would assist others they would collectively organize a horseback ride in honor of the ancestors that were killed at Wounded Knee by the 7th Cavalry in the Wounded Knee Massacre, and ride on horseback through blizzard winter conditions, 350 miles through the most arduous, unbelievable conditions, and have that spiritual strength of determination through ceremony and through a connection with our ancestors to be able to work through all that and move through all that pain and suffering, knowing that that was what was needed to assist our nations and peoples to revitalize and to strengthen once again. So the wiping of the tears of those that passed so horribly, that kind of working through that spiritual type of healing that's so necessary for the people. And I just wanted to acknowledge that he was such a remarkable person. And I wouldn't be doing any of this work, I believe, in the way that I am without his mentorship and him taking me under his wing back in 1992. And now I have the good fortune of working with my daughter, Shauna Blue Star Newcomb, who also has that, who was born on that same day, February 10th, 2019, the day he passed. And then also working with Joe Day Gowdy as well, who's just a very remarkable person who I have the good fortune to be able to work with. So there are so many people, including yourself, that I admire the work that everyone is doing. Collectively, we're trying to make a positive difference in the world, and it's not always about power over. It's about relationship with. And the first principle of generosity, the first law actually of generosity, such as Virgil taught with the 7 laws of the Ochecheshikoan, the 7 council fires of the Great Sioux Nation. And then we're also connected with the Kanaka Maoli people, and my good friend William Larnell. He's a great support person, and so we're very, very fortunate to have the network of people that we do.
Stephen, I just want to thank you for all the hard work and the hours and the dedication and the sacrifice that you've done to have carried this in your spirit and in your soul, to generously give to all of us and for the future generations to come. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, and I definitely have to thank my wife, Paige, because she's such a tremendous support for 37 years. And
yeah.
What a remarkable person she is.
Hi, Paige.
Thank you.
I know you're watching.
Thank you.
And so now I'm going to hand it off to Shauna.
Thank you, Janelle.
Yeah.
And yes, we are going to introduce our next panelist. Our second panelist is Joe Day Gowdy, my father, Stephen Newcomb, just mentioned. And Joe Day Gowdy is the former chairman of the Yakama Nation Tribal Council. Combined with the mentorship of Stephen Newcomb and the guidance of his traditional ways of life, he has supported the work to help bring awareness to the domination dehumanization system that is a result of the historical and current implementation of the doctrine of discovery. The experiences of elected leadership and other roles in which he has served gives a unique perspective with regard to how the domination system manifests in our practical world. And so welcome, Joe Day, and we have just a few questions for you. One question that we have is, what does the title Police Since 1492 and Incarceration of Native Nations mean to you?
Well,
And
thank you
welcome,
very much,
welcome for being
yeah,
here.
thank you for the introduction, Shauna. I greatly appreciate it. And, you know, after listening to Steve, and I've had the honor and the blessing to be able to interact and listen to Steve for quite some time, it's kind of hard to say what can you contribute. But when it comes to the question, and I want to repeat and thank you for the introduction, but the title of today's event, I think, there's many things that enter my heart and my mind specific to that. But when people have had the opportunity to receive the introduction and the setting of context that Steve was able to offer in his dialogue there, I would think that, you know, number one, Native nations, Native people, original free nations, you know, I think about the time period that existed before and that was expressed in 1491 and thereby since time immemorial, our creation stories and everything that existed and the mannerisms by which you know, life existed previous to that and throughout the generations. And as we move forward and come to an awareness, you know, each of us coming to being born into this world at this specific time period and trying to go through an understanding of that awareness, understanding who one is, understanding where one comes from, to better have an understanding of where one wishes to go as a Native person. And so, you know, there's many ways that I think that title, I guess you can say, speaks to my heart. But first and foremost, it's got to be at the foundation by which I understand my own identity, and that is as a human being, you know, as a Native person who has been born into this awareness, as a person who identifies with the Yakama Nation, of which I'm an enrolled member, as a person who identifies with the Washat way of life that our people within this region and this territory have carried on since time immemorial. And there's many practices with regard to that way of life that we incorporate. And so the foundation of such becomes that of who you are. And when I look at a question like that, I have to look at it, or a title like that, and say, what is my perception, my identity? And that's something that's been incorporated to me through the interactions with, you know, elders. I've been very blessed in my life ever since I was a child to have very strong traditional elders that have been around me and surrounded me with love and support and teachings. And then when you are able to utilize that as your foundation to begin to express what that title means, and then you have to come to the understanding of the practical awareness of what reality is presented to us and are dictated to us as Steve would identify, a domination system. And unfortunately, we are the survivors of the greatest genocidal acts in the known history of man. And in many representations, those acts are still happening today. They're just happening in a very silent and a very veiled manner. And so from a practical standpoint, because I go back a few years and able to, through some unique actions that happened in my life, I was able to meet Steve Newcomb. And that from that time, he had begun to express to me a more deeper awareness, much as he did to everybody here. And that, as he had expressed, is just kind of not even the tip of the iceberg with regard to this kind of information, and how essentially that information develops the building blocks or the foundational blocks of the history of the present moment, as he indicated. His good friend and a man named Peter DeRico, he coined that term, the history of the present moment. And so when you come to understand that many of the foundational blocks that are formalizing reality as we understand it, be it the interaction of your individual identity with that of the collective identity, and how you carry that forward as a Native person into a Native community, perhaps a Native nation, interfacing and or interacting with that of other entities, such as the United States, or such as the states, or such as local jurisdictions. And then the interface of such becomes that of how a person takes their foundational way of life and wishes to express, perhaps through their identity and pursuing to express themselves in their awareness, addressing the well-being of that which they love. And so for me, that's my family, that's my community. Previously, in a form of elected official, it was, my nation, but it's also the resources, it's also the foods, it's also the animals, and all those things that encompass that. So I guess you can say that's some of the thoughts that come to my mind with this title. It can be taken in many different directions with regard to many of the consequences that have been endured by the practical existence of a domination system, which essentially manifest into many consequences that materialize on the ground for Native nations and people in general. And so anyway, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jode. And so you did speak to it a little bit, and just to elaborate, you had a really excellent focus on so many different effects of that. One other question is, how do you see this? Well, what can we do about, I guess, this domination, dehumanization, and this theme, as you elaborated on? What can we do about it as individuals, and what can we do about it collectively?
Yeah. Well, I think there and again, when you take a question like that, for myself as an individual, and I'm not here to tell anybody this is what you do about it. All I can do is share my life experience, share my thoughts, and share my prayers with regard to the kind of answers that have been invoked within my heart, my body, and my spirit about these kind of questions. So as an individual, I'll share that, number one, I would hope that everyone that has the ability goes through a very strong effort of identifying who you are, of seeking the ceremonial steps that potentially exist within your Native nations and our peoples and ways of life, to look into your own heart, look into your own spirit, look into your own body. And through that journey of self-awareness, I think that if you go about it in a manner by which you express, a substantial amount of effort, and life is kind of like anything that you put into it, that's what you get out of it. And unfortunately, what I observe, in general, sometimes about society as we identify with it today, is that society, for the most part, we're kind of like a top ramen generation. Like, we want our answer right now. And if you can't give it to me in 5 minutes, you're either wrong or there's something wrong with you. But I would encourage anyone who goes down a pathway, and those that perhaps have gone down those pathways, that when you come to a journey of self-reflection and begin to establish the basis for your identity, that which you understand yourself to be, all right, mentally, physically, and spiritually, and utilizing that foundation to be the basis by which you know and how you utilize as a reference point your interactions with, number one, your household, your loved ones, your family, your wife, your husband, your children, your mother, your father, your grandparents, your grandchildren, whoever you may be, and then once again out into the larger. And so it's taking the refined understanding of who one is and where one comes from a ceremonial aspect. And if you struggle with trying to identify how do you do that, I would recommend that you go to the elders of your people, of your nation, and seek them out. And if you're unable to seek them out, then you search with everything that you got to go find elders to say, what steps can we as people or as Native people take to identify a better understanding or remember who we are? And I think that's extremely critical. That's extremely critical, because perhaps if you're able to go down that pathway, you'll be able to come to a realization, perhaps. The realization that I came to in pursuit of trying to identify and take steps for myself was one very beautiful thing that happened. And the beautiful thing that happened for me is that the Spirit showed itself and identified itself to be real to me in a way that was it was undoubtable. It was real. And when that happened for me, it changed my whole outlook on life, on everything. And I could never go back to the way that I kind of thought or believed before. And I think that anyone who's trying to come to an awareness of a domination system or a dehumanization system, I would hope that before you start trying to identify what that is or what you do about it, that you take as many and as strong as steps as you can to identifying who you are mentally, physically, and spiritually, because that becomes the foundation of how you interact with something so substantial and so detrimental as a system of domination, which has essentially lived through the past centuries and materialized into great detriment, great dehumanization in and amongst our peoples, our resources, our ways of life. And so, what I'm just trying to advocate that, number one, what can you do about it? You better go and fight with everything that you got to come to a center in your life and a peace within your life so that you can interface with something as substantial and detrimental as the domination dehumanization system. Because if you don't, you potentially could set yourself up for trying to develop thoughts and our actions about what you do about this domination system that's resulted in such dehumanizing consequences for our people. And if you don't center yourself and put yourself in a position to put serious thought and perhaps prayer into what you do about this, there may be consequences by your actions and your thought process that come for innocent people.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I've always prayed about all this as I've become aware. But I think that if you're able to establish that journey, then the task becomes trying to find like-minded individuals, other individuals who have the hearts, the minds, and the spirits to be able to understand this information, to be able to discern it, and to be able to identify the reality of really putting yourself in a position to say, okay, I've become aware. I've become aware with regard to how a domination system is materializing before my eyes. This is what I wish to do about it. Okay, so I think the task at hand right now is a continuation of what your father and others had started, Shauna, many, many years ago with regard to continued awareness. And because the domination system has done a very, very good job at concealing the very nature of its existence. And so awareness becomes key, continuing to push awareness, but then identifying individuals, entities, and our organizations, our people who can come to the forefront and begin to get into very conscientious, very well thought out discussions and humble discussions that are founded in a basis of integrity, of love and compassion, saying collectively, this is what we wish to do about this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you go about it that way, then that's a path. So
wonderful. Thank you. And thank you for sharing, your personal journey and really speaking from the heart. We appreciate that. And we want to pass it on to our next panelist. I'll pass it back over to you, Janelle.
Thank you, Shauna.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shauna and Joe Day. I've been like, have a lot of Kleenex over here. Putting my fan up. Can't ruin my makeup. It's beautiful. So it's just, So we have another a guest that I adore, and her mother is on our board of directors, Lynette Tubles, and Philip Whiteman has Lynette's partner, husband, has participated in Red Nation RNCI events, and I was so blown away by seeing Crystal at Mount Rushmore recently. And I'd like to introduce her to all of you, for those of you who aren't aware of Crystal Tubuls. Crystal is the director of the Land Back campaign for Native Collective. And Oglala, Lakota, and Northern Cheyenne organizer from Northern Cheyenne Territory in Lame Deer, Montana. She has extensive experience on the front lines and with campaign development and management on local and national and transnational campaigns for social, racial, and environmental justice. Crystal identity as a Native American veteran is central to her organizing and storytelling. At the heart of Crystal's work are the connections between collective wellness, environmental justice, Indigenous peoples' rights, and I know I'm going to have a hard time with that pronunciation, Shauna. It's okay, we'll get to it when we bring Crystal on. In healing from her experience as a soldier, Crystal has dedicated herself to empowering what she views as the essential quality of a warrior, a commitment to the well-being of not only her people and their relationship to the land, but that for all peoples. Crystal, last month, Crystal, I'd like to introduce Crystal Tubuls, everyone. This is Crystal. Hi, Crystal. I really want to thank you for being part of the conversation today.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Crystal, we're going to ask you, last month you helped organize the Land Back campaign for Mount Rushmore. What was your experience there? And can you tell us more about the behind the intention of this Land Back campaign with Indian Collective?
Yeah, so first off, Apivev Shiv, Mene Wo Statna Nehav. My name's Crystal Tubuls. And militarism, anti-militarism is the word, Jonelle, that you were looking for.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I mean, there's several different components, and I'm sure we'll get to them as far as, you know, the way that we are experiencing, you know, in reference to the title, policing and the criminalization of like organizers and activists during this time frame. But, you know, I was part of the action that took place at Mount Rushmore on July 3rd. So I actually was fresh off of Tulsa as well. So Trump had decided that Juneteenth, a sacred day for our Black relatives, was a good time to launch his campaign rallies in Tulsa. And Tulsa was the site of, you know, Black Wall Street and also the Tulsa massacre. And you know, that was a jab. And so we organized, myself and another group of veterans, and we were there. And then, you know, I was home and realized that he had also announced that he was going to be at Mount Rushmore. For those that don't know, like Mount Rushmore is sacred land to the Oceti-Sakowin peoples. I'm Oglala Lakota, Northern Cheyenne. Both have treaty rights there in that territory. And basically we said that's trespassing, and that all of the Trump supporters are also trespassing if they are deciding to go up to Mount Rushmore on July 3rd for that fireworks display. And, you know, Mount Rushmore is one of those places where that is like the ultimate shrine to white supremacy, right? We heard a lot of really amazing context for what we see playing out today in movement spaces, you know, whether that means you know, response to COVID-19, whether that means responses to Black Lives Matter, or whether that means responses to Indigenous sovereignty in you know, the McGirt case in the ruling in Oklahoma, and all of the recent wins that Indian country has been experiencing. Mount Rushmore was just one of those places where the ultimate shrine of white supremacy was going to have this person that upholds that white supremacy visit. And so we organized an action where our goal was basically, you know, to block traffic and prevent folks from getting up there. And myself and 20 other folks were arrested during that time. And, you know, during that time, I think one of the things I remember the most was I was interviewed impromptu in the middle of the action. I was standing on top of a van for a vantage point, and they asked me what my thoughts were as a veteran. And I said that I'm a warrior first and foremost before a veteran, and that this is what we do to protect our people, is that we continue to show up and we continue to challenge those narratives. We continue to organize and we continue to take to the streets in these ways to challenge that. And that kind of gets to some of the questions that were asked previously, as well as like, what do we do? But yeah, it was a proud moment. And it was one of those things that, there was so much synchronicity and spiritual energy around what we did, that groups of folks who typically hadn't worked together worked together. And it felt like there was just so much energy there that when we did that, I'm not taking credit for the long legacy of organizing and activism that takes place to get these wins, right? But I also feel like what we did at Mount Rushmore and taking that stand was like this extra little energetic boost that rippled out into the universe and gave these other movements a little bit of a boost. And so so I don't know, I feel like there was so much spiritual grounding, and it was definitely one of the actions. I've been to quite a few actions in my life and organized a lot, but Mount Rushmore action was definitely one of those places that I was most proud of and the most honored to have been a part of.
Well, Crystal, I have to say, as from one sister to another, I am so happy that you were there, because it made me proud. It made me proud that you were there. And, the Black Hills, I've been sundancing there for almost all of my life. And so that was important. The work that you did there. And I'm happy to hear that there were so many organizations that came together in unity to support each other. And I'd like to talk to you about, if you can introduce us to how did you initiate, like, how did you come about in your spirit and in your soul to create the hashtag land back and get on board with that? Like, what initiated that in your spirit to take that initiative on?
I have to be honest, land back has been, if we're really honest about it, land back movement organizing it's been in existence since we were first removed from our lands, right? Since we were originally disconnected from our lands, which is a result of the doctrine of discovery, right? To access resources, to access land, and to remove Indigenous peoples from those lands and from those resources to have free access, right? And so I can't take claim for that at all. We are simply organizing around it in this iteration. And to be honest, I feel like there's so many organizers and so many people that have put in efforts to normalize and popularize the hashtag land back, right? And I believe, I want to say that it actually first started becoming more normalized around Wet'suwet'en, in so-called Canada. And they're organizing with unceded territories and lands up there in their fight to protect their lands and to maintain their connection and their relationship to their lands. And I kind of want to add, like, all of that, just like thinking about the doctrine of discovery in the title of this, right, is I really think about this a lot because of my identity as a veteran, and trying to connect colonization to that, and how does militarism and being anti-militarist play into that. And really the way I look at it, and what I really appreciate about Stephen and Jody's, the way they shared was sharing the real history, right? And really getting at this, our history predates the so-called United States, that this is just a project, an experiment that we're existing in, right? But that the colonization of these lands is what removed us. But the important thing about that too is that militarism, the US military, formed around indigenous resistance on these lands when we were trying to maintain connections to our lands. And the US military formed to actually try to forcefully remove us. And so it was the enforcer, and still is the enforcer, of colonization. And so as, you know, as a veteran and someone who identifies as a warrior, you know, it was a long healing journey to reconcile that and to really look at like my role in being a US soldier was actually, you know, perpetuating colonization. But not only that, the colonial template that was used on us here on Turtle Island was then taken, because it was so effective, and used in not, this is such a simplified way of explaining it, but, and then is now taken through the US and used in other indigenous communities to get access to their lands and to get access to their resources, and sending us into war with other indigenous communities. And so, and that's imperialism, right? And it, like I said, it's a very simplified way of looking at it, but it also gives me context for how I was a part of that. I was used as a tool of imperialism and perpetuated colonialism. And I had to go through like a long healing journey to really reconcile my identities. And now, you know, I'm now at a place where I can actually be proud of the skill sets that I've learned and the experiences that I've gained and the knowledge that I've gained, and use that and turn around and organize against the state, the very country that instilled those things into me. And that's what we've seen at Mount Rushmore. And that's what we've seen even with the Dakota Access Pipeline, as you mentioned, you know, speaking about criminalization, I was sued for racketeering by Energy Transfer Partners for my role at Standing Rock. And, you know, that took up over a year of my life and my energy. And I'm currently in a lawsuit with Energy Transfer Partners. So when the racketeering lawsuit was dropped and dismissed by the judge, they turned around and filed a lawsuit in North Dakota court. So this policing and this idea of policing us since 1492, that's manifesting very real with organizers and activists like myself right now.
Well, I really appreciate you and Crystal for sharing your truth on the torn, you know, realities that you have dealt with inside your soul, you know, and your spirit, because I too, I'm going to share, have had that as well, not as a veteran, but due to my DNA and due to my relations as a human being. I mean, because I am Native and Spanish, Sephardic Spanish, right? So it's like, oh, they came here, you know, and this is the very thing we're talking about today, of the Spanish crown, you know, coming here and taking over. So when I was younger, when I was very, very young, I can recall at age 3 that I never wanted to say that I was Spanish, had Spanish blood, never. I only claimed my native. And it was only as a young adult woman that I started honoring my ancestors as well on that side of my family. And recognizing that they had, over the centuries, have partnered with our native peoples in New Mexico, and hence here I am. So I have had to honor that. But I wanted to thank you, Crystal, for being part of this conversation. And I believe that we're going to have a little bit of time to get back to each panelist. So I'm excited about that. So thank you for sharing your truth, Crystal. I'm going to hand it over to Shauna.
Thank you, Janelle.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been wonderful to hear these different experiences and the personal journeys of many of our panelists. And we're going to bring it over to our next panelist, is Eric Bringswhite. Eric says, the truth of the American experience for my people is a far different one than can be read in history's books. The Euro-Western historians have enjoyed the luxury of living out much of the truth for too long. Our story is still being written, and that is why Eric founded the Indigenous Americas Institute of Legacy, or IM Legacy Center for short. I Am Legacy is a grassroots system impacted group of community members who have made a commitment to serve, advocate, protect, and cultivate youth who are the change makers for the next 7 generations. With I Am Legacy, Eric works to impact the industry standards that are utilized to systematically marginalize and disenfranchise Native communities and place them in the criminal justice system, foster care, and out-of-home placements. Repairing and restoring our healing, wellness, and health is a generational endeavor. It's wonderful to have you with us today, Eric, and thank you for your great background. With that background, where do you see Indigenous and/or tribal communities in the next 25 years?
Greetings, relatives. I appreciate the introduction. Where do I see us in the next 25 years? In the face of incarceration, punishment, which is what modern day colonization looks like. In 25 years, we may very well be a nation of felons within a nation. So that'll bring our sovereignty into the forefront for many of our future generations. I think it's really important to define who we are, even in the face of overwhelming assimilation and colonization strategies. I was just blown away by all 3 of the presenters before me, especially your father. He's definitely a wisdom keeper. And to tap into that as a resource is one of our safeguards to becoming, I guess, just assimilated. But our assimilation is going to look a little different. We're going to be forced to be 2nd and 3rd class citizens. Once we assimilate, we'll never, like something what your father said, to become human, we have to fall under that rule. and I do think there is a strategy behind our incarceration. Today, in some places in Indian country, 2 out of 3 Native American males can expect to experience incarceration. Some communities, if we broke the population down into just 2 demographics, 18 and under and 18 and over, the 18 and over is severely impacted by the criminalization processes that we're forced to endure. Some communities have a 100% Native American incarceration rate. The Constitution of this, wonderful experiment that's called America, it isn't protecting us. And so, we have to step up and protect ourselves. I think one of the umbrellas that affords us some protections is the treaties. And a lot of our elders, Virgil, referred to the treaties as the supreme law of the land. There's an article, I think it's Article 12, that says 2/3 of the males have to be in agreement before a major decision is made by the tribe. Within 25 years, if the incarceration rate continues on its present course, I think we'll be visited by the federal government. They'll come in their suits and their ties and to shake hands, and they'll say, hey, let's discuss this treaty. After all, we didn't do these things to you. They were done to your ancestors, by our ancestors. Let's figure this out, and before the proceedings can begin, they'll say, but a couple things here. First, those of you who are felons, you're excluded from these discussions. And is that a strategic way to circumnavigate our rights and the obligations that are owed to our people? I do believe that once a good number of natives get up to be excluded from the conversation, that the next requirement that will be put upon us would be, one last thing is those of you who cannot speak your language, you're also excluded from these, because one of the criteria that the US government uses to define a culture or a people is language. And we're quickly becoming one language people. I think it's all by strategic design. Hopefully I answered your question.
Thank you. Yeah, these are very complicated matters, and I think you've addressed a lot of these complications that people really fail to understand how challenging it is to navigate this domination, dehumanization system that has been created. And, as Indigenous peoples, we're experiencing these challenges. So thank you for speaking to some of those different nuances. How would you say that Indigenous and/or tribal communities can begin to reconnect, repair, and restore ancestral values, virtues, and views?
I think it's just respecting our roots. They say our first sacred site is the womb, and that makes the ceremony, the birth of the child, the first sacred ceremony. And so looking at our culture as the cure, culture is prevention, culture heals. And I think really defining who we are as a people and utilizing our precious resources as safeguards to, being colonized or just being stripped of our sacredness. So as soon as we're, if we're targeted for prosecution, if we're a people that's targeted for prosecution on a nation to nation level, So each tribe is recognized, federally recognized in a court of law, and given, and inherent rights, right? If once we become, and a lot of natives that I know don't feel that their experience within the justice system was fair. And so just taking that into consideration, as fast as we are being criminalized, the tribe can decriminalize. As fast as we are becoming incarcerated, the tribe can decarcerate. And our culture is that safeguard. Our culture. So how I began this work was I began serving youth like myself who were experiencing what probably the predominant youth experience in too many communities. That led me to the foster care system. I looked at the foster care system, and conservatively, just under 70% of that population was indigenous. That led me to juvenile incarceration, which led me to adult incarceration. It's like a stick. You can't pick up one side without picking up the other. And so I picked it up, and having experienced incarceration, I understand the full ramifications of what incarceration is. I think tribes would be well to begin, something that Mr. Newcomb said earlier. He said it was a matter of jurisdiction, or acknowledging that jurisdiction. And so I think the tribes would benefit by utilizing those strategies as safeguards for its populations. Knowing that we are, we may be targeted for prosecution or marked for incarceration, just using data and statistics. I think a tribe could restore an individual's rights upon completion of whatever requirements that tribe thought would be beneficial for that individual to meet. I think if the focus was to kill the Indian and save the man, maybe we can utilize that concept of, reviving the Indian, and the man will prosper, and just those safeguards on nation to nation, restoration of our rights. Once you become a felon, you're faced with lifelong legal discrimination. It's not like natives are the most discriminated against people, right up there with our Black relatives and other people of color. We're not immune to that. And so, just placing them safeguards strategically would I think begin repairing ourselves and preparing for our future.
Thank you so much. Yes, I like that you're speaking to that restoration, and that's very good to consider. And I especially liked about just this idea of thriving, like save the Indian, and it's almost kind of like then we will thrive.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, thank you. And I'll pass it back to you, Janelle.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Well, Eric, I just, I've had to take off my glasses because the tears, it was like so precious and powerful. I so appreciate you. You got me with, the first sacred site is our womb, and the first ceremony is our birth, and the first medicine is the maniwaka, our water. So, and for it to come from a man's point of view, from that little boy inside of you, I appreciate you. What a powerful, powerful messages today. Everyone just sharing from their heart. I'm so happy we did this. Now I'm going to ask Shauna, our co-host, who I think we're going to have to do this again, Shauna, for the next episode. So let's see here. Shauna, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions.
Yes.
What ripple effects do you see with current intergenerational trauma and the long-term effects of domination of Native nations?
Yes. That's a big question.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that, people that may or may not have that indigenous lineage may not really quite understand, how deep it goes. And certainly I think those of us that have that family connection in our indigenous ancestry, like there's something that is unspoken of this deep grief. It's like a profound grief, mixed with also like this kind of a sense of resilience and self-determination that I think is really beautiful to see in our people. And it also brings tears to my eyes because it's like it just runs so deep, like within myself, and just the disconnections that we feel and maybe we don't allow ourselves to feel. But certainly people may not understand that, just are in the modern day world, what it feels like to essentially be spoken of as though we are extinct, as though we do not exist. And that domination dehumanization system that was introduced, that was the intention from the beginning. And so that's something that I think is really profound, to just sit with that and have people understand that. And it goes so much beyond that, though. It's like, we can look to, I speak a lot about this contrast between that dominization system, as well as what I speak to, like the reverence code system of our original nations and peoples. And in that domination system, I see it as a system that is life destroying and life consuming. And the original nations and our indigenous peoples have an understanding of ways of living in harmony and balance that are life sustaining and life nurturing. And there's honor and respect and regard and an understanding of the interconnection of all things, which is not taken into account in our modern day world, certainly. So I think the bigger part of it that I feel is a big loss is that connection to the land. And then that also relates to that loss of connection to our culture and the loss of our languages. I also feel a sense of hope that, there are a lot of our younger generations are coming into a restoration to remember our languages and find our way back, so to speak, or some have been able to carry it within their families. And I think that's so beautiful to listen to the oral stories and oral traditions of our elders wherever we can. There's so much knowledge and wisdom, though, that has been lost, and just finding any nugget of how we can hold on to these ways that bring like incredible knowledge and wisdom from time immemorial, and understanding the free and independent existence of our original nations and peoples, and that deep connection to the land and the spiritual connection that is so meaningful to us, and really holding that, like for our young people to remember that, you know, how important it is that we honor and connect with our ancestors and our lands, and understanding that, you know, the water protectors, we're here to be in connection with that land, and it's a part of us as we are part of it, and we are connected to our ancestors. And I really appreciated today hearing from our panelists that, you know, like Joe DeGaudy speaking to finding our way back to that spiritual connection. That's part of this, is that deep spiritual connection that has been severed in many ways, and finding our way back, whether we are of indigenous ancestry of Turtle Island or wherever it may be in the world. You know, it's something so beneficial to our planet right now, where we're facing climate change and all the destructive effects of that. These are more of the ripple effects, but I see it as the body, the mind, the heart, the spirit, our relationships with one another and ourselves, our sense of purpose, our abundance, and our impact in our communities, our families, and our planet. All of these things are being affected by, these are part of the ripple effects. We can see it in the domination, dehumanization system, and how that plays out in diseases, and, you know, the waters being polluted, all of these different ways that as Native peoples, we've been trying to speak up and share our voices of wisdom and what our ancestors have known. And yet there's that system that's coming in and trying to say, you know, oh no, it's about this, and power and control over, and domination, dehumanization. In those paper bowls, it speaks to, you know, something for God, glory, and gold. And when that is the only real goal, that's certainly not life sustaining and life nurturing. So I see, you know, there's so many effects. You could go on and on, but yeah, the intergenerational effects it's really a lot. We could have a whole topic just on that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I bringing up like I'm going to just shorten the word and just say declone. Okay. I was just thinking while you were sharing, like declone. So how I started my decloning, right, was getting sober. So I'm in like my the end of the month, I'll have 39 years sober. And my sobriety and my emotional sobriety, my spiritual sobriety is what led me back to ceremony and back to my remembering, you know, where I come from. So I just wanted to share that little bit. I have another question, and then we're going to open it up. Shauna, what parallels do you see between this time of the pandemic that are affecting people globally and the incarceration of Native nations?
Yes, well, thank you for sharing as well your journey back to spirit. I think it's an individual journey for each person, and it's beautiful when we can find it for ourselves in our own unique way. So I guess I kind of want to share this story of an elder that, you know, like Lakota, they talk about making a relative ceremony, and making a relative ceremony is like, you know, we adopt people into our family, and we bring people into our community. And so I feel honored and grateful for this elder, Grandma Wilma Crow, who is in my community. And she's was originally from Standing Rock of the Lakota Nation. And she shared a story with us. She lived to be 100 years old and passed on last year. But she shared about when she was quite young, I think she might have been 6 years old or so, that she remembers that all of the children and all the families were gathered up, and they were made to come to the center of their village or their land. And all these cavalry, these soldiers, were coming around on horseback and had rifles and would shoot anyone that would leave this certain area. So they had them literally incarcerated within this, contained and under coercion and threat, and who knows what they, it's a terrible thing. And so she also spoke to the men were being told that they needed to break the arrow and take the shovel as sort of like this ceremonial act that they were going to not make war with the United States anymore, and they were going to accept kind of their little area, and they were going to sign some papers to make this official. But they literally had guns, and they were putting them under threat. But I see, it's a terrible story, but she told it in this light way, which elders tend to have their humorous ways about them, the way that they can share things. But she said, eventually after I don't know how many days, the children were all crying, and they had felt like they had to do this. They did that. They took the shovel and they signed those papers. And so I just think of that, like the loss of that and what she experienced. And she felt also, there was like this loss of their way of life that they had, where they would be able to go to their ceremonial lands and go to their hunting grounds, and they had their original life before that until she was 6 years old or so. And I see that so many things in this pandemic time, people are complaining, oh, we want our normal ways back. We can't do our ceremonies as we can't have our birthday parties or our graduations or all of these things, and we're disconnected from our families, we're disconnected from our friends, we can't travel, we can't go where we want to go. We are worried about our elders, or we're worried about our children, we're worried about the sick and disabled who are in our families. There's all this trauma as well, or the economic challenges that people are facing, but really also this displacement of people when they're able to be in their homes. And I see, so much of that is kind of this parallel to what our Indigenous nations and peoples have experienced with the displacement of, we've seen the Trail of Tears. And in the history books, they may say, oh, this Native group over, these Indians or this Native Americans, they migrated from the East Coast over to Oklahoma. In the case of our family, like Shawnee and Lenape, oh, they just migrated. No, they were forced, they were coerced and threatened and made to walk in these horrific conditions, as my dad spoke to Virgil Killstreet, honoring, what our people have endured. So I really see, there's kind of this parallel right now. People are feeling a sense of a loss of freedom, a loss of what they're used to and what they're accustomed to. And it gives a sense of kind of things that we have been feeling as Indigenous nations and peoples for a very long time. But I also see the opportunity that we're all able to come to new understandings with these types of conversations, and helping to understand that we're all in this together when we're seeing the effects on our planet and that domination dehumanization system affecting not only our Indigenous nations and peoples, but all peoples throughout the planet. And the more that we can really come to an understanding that those elders and our ancestors, they upheld a way of balance and harmony for thousands of years. And it's only been within, the last 200, 300 years that we've seen all of this destruction of the modern day world. And so there's a lot of wisdom there that can be discerned from our Native elders and from our people. And it's time that these voices be heard. So that's my message today.
That was a good one, Shauna. That's a good one. So we're going to open it up for, let's see, we have we have time to open it up to the rest of our panelists. So I'm going to ask Jode, let's see, there's some questions that have come in. So the first question is, Native peoples are so resilient to have survived so much over the centuries. How have we been able to survive this long? That was a question from our audience out there.
Okay, thank you, Jonelle, for calling upon me to take the easiest question. That's a tough one, but I think that you've heard representations that have come from each of the panelists that are showing principles, characteristics, choices, and pathways of life when it comes to the resiliency that has been endured throughout time. And so, you know, in today's time, yes, there's some great and some very significant challenges that we endure, I think, as individuals, those who exist at this time. But you know, I think back to my great grandmothers. I think back to my great grandfathers, and like many of us who carry the knowledge and the history, as Shauna was expressing from her ancestors, some of the great trials and tribulations and atrocities that our people have lived through not too very long ago. And I think that it's been, in a sense, the collective ways of life that have existed since time immemorial. And when it comes to understanding that every one of us, Native nations and peoples, you know, for our way of life, that came from what someone might identify as a divine interaction. The creation stories and the origin stories that come with our people, like many other Native nations. And so when you're saying, you know, like if it's in our language, Anatla or Tamanwithla, our creator, or however anyone identifies with that beautiful creation, the great mystery, you're dealing with something that the creator brought forth. And so no matter what type of domination system or the consequences that materialize through a dehumanization process has been done to our people historically, it's been that resiliency. And I think that the greatest tools that our people have been able to pull forward in that time have been our ways of life, our language, the identification and the relationship with our ceremonies and the practices of those ceremonies, the relationship with our foods, our traditional foods throughout time. And it's been the sustainment of that practice and the fulfillment of that way of life that, in a sense, even though that may not have been a direct reaction to the type of atrocities or genocidal acts that may have been imposed upon our people, it was the practice of our way of life that sustained us. And I believe it will be the continued practice of our way of life that will sustain us into the future. And so when you look at it, at the current domination system, you know, someone said, well, what is that? Well, some of it was spoken to today, and listening to the other panelists and the way that they express themselves, you know, but the domination system, you know, the McGirt case was mentioned earlier, McGirt v. Oklahoma. That's a jurisdictional question that was brought forth between the Supreme Court. And as Steve had mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the origin of federal Indian law is based upon a false religious pretense. And when you take into consideration what that really means, not only federal Indian law, or what someone identifies as federal Indian law, that the origin or the beginning of that was an assertion to adopt the doctrine of Christian discovery and impose and implement that into the United States judicial branch. And that has never been undone. But it's not just the law that does that. It's not just the law that frames and develops the context of what we understand the function of society to be. There's obviously the legislative branch of the United States, which has supplemented that law throughout time through legislative acts that also are formulating the practical blocks of reality as we understand it. And so, you know, historically, from our ancestors' perspective, coming into today's time, it's become more complex, but it's become because of people like Steve, you know, who spent his life, you know, being able to analyze and dissect some of these things. Our ancestors were never given that opportunity to understand the very deceitful nature by which they were being engaged with. But nonetheless, in spite of that deceit, which materializes and continues today in the function of Native nations, I believe it's our ways of life that endure and sustain in spite of all that madness. And part of that madness, I got to say this if I don't get an opportunity to speak, part of that madness is ourselves. Because part of the dehumanization that is a consequence of living in a domination system is we have that mentality of attacking one another as Native people, that crabs in a bucket or that whatever it may be. And so this system that we all have endure and that we all go through, and there's many mechanisms that put us in positions to not thrive when it comes to our physical, our mental, or our spiritual well-being. But that's something that needs to be spoken of too, the manner by which we attack one another, and that we go about that. So I know that's off the question, and I better stop there before I start going on a long rant. Opportunity, but I want to say this before I go. Yes, a domination system exists. It is there, and if you do your due diligence to understand how it functions, you'll be better served with regard to how to navigate this world in a practical standpoint. But there's one other thing that we have as Native people and all people. There is not a domination system that I am aware of that exists in this world that can take away your free will. It cannot take away your free will as an individual. And I think everyone needs to understand that the power that they have as individuals and your free will with regard to how you interface with that domination system is something that you should never give up. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jode. And I totally agree with you that we need to have a discussion on how our Native peoples, some of us out there, are not supporting the bigger, how we don't support each other in the crabs in the bucket and all of that. That I think was designed and people have honed in on that. And I'm writing a chapter in my book on that, and it's a very intense conversation that we need to all come together, and we'll maybe do that in season 2 for sure. I think there's a healing that can happen if we bring it out into the open and in public and talk about it instead of brushing it under the couch and not dealing with it in public. And so I think this would be a safe forum to have that conversation. So let's see. Okay. Okay. So I would like to ask Eric. Eric, what are you doing today in regards to the work that you're doing and in regards to being police since 1492? Your journey.
So
we just to give you guys heads up, we have just time thing. That's all.
Yeah. So we have the I Am Legacy Center that's focused specifically on system impacted individuals to restore and repair our sacredness. And we have curriculum. I think, nature was never allowed to take its course with our people. We were just simple contact with, the Euro-Westerner really disrupted the dream that Creator had for us. And I think how we are so resilient in the face of that is ceremony and recognition of not only our blessings, but our hurts. And there's ceremonies annually to begin restoring and repairing our generations. And so that's what we're doing. We're focused on system impacted individuals, youth, prevention and intervention strategies, healing. Like we said earlier, as culture heals, and you know, it's not evidence-based. That's one of the things that Native service providers, we're not evidence-based, or we're not best practice, but we've been here for eons, and our cultures are evidence-based. You know, we're proof of it.
Well, thank you, Eric. I want to bring Crystal back on and ask Crystal a question from the audience. And the question is, what would you say to our white allies who want to support Native peoples and their rights to their land?
That's a really simple one. Land back.
Yeah.
If you want to support Native Indigenous people's relationship and connection to the land, give the land back. You know, gift the land back, will it back, whatever it is. Like, yeah, I feel like that's like something that needs to happen a long time ago. And so that's like a pretty simple one for me, is land back.
I concur with you. I feel the same way. Absolutely. Absolutely. Very simple. And so I was going to bring this up after each of our guests, but I'm going to bring it up now. And that is, you know, in order for us to continue this work, all of this work comes out of Red Nation Celebration Institute, and we are in our 25th anniversary this month, actually. And so there's, in order for us to do this and have it be available for free and to the public, is that we count on viewers like you to help support the nonprofit Red Nation Celebration Institute. So there is a donate button at the top of each screen of each of our guests, and you could visit there and contribute if you like, and continue to support us by, you know, subscribing, you know, joining in on the conversation by watching our programming, our content, or actually donating some money to help us with these very important conversations. We have, in 25 years, I am really proud to say, we have never had to do a fundraiser, or we've never had to ask for funding to the public. We've been blessed in that way, really. And so this is the first time in the history of our organization that we're reaching out to you so that we can continue to bring these programs to you. Yeah, we just, anything would help. It would be greatly appreciated. And we have a lot more programming content to come throughout the year. We have our Red Nation Film Festival coming up in November. It's going to be 30 days of our narrative. We have almost all the top Native films, the new ones being screened, and we have great master classes, and that'll come later. So I encourage you to take a look at that on our website. And also, every Wednesday on Facebook, we will be going live with our 25th anniversary and talking about the legacy of Red Nation, how we started, how it came about, where it came from, all the artists that we've supported over the 25 years and continue to support, and all the new and emerging filmmakers that we have on board with us. So I encourage you to check it out. Okay, so we now are going to move over to Stephen. But before we do that, I want to thank all of you all of you out there that are tuning in today and supporting this narrative of our conversation. And these conversations are very, very precious because these aren't the typical conversations that you hear in daily conversations or in the media or anywhere, really. So I just want to thank you for tuning in, and I want to thank all of our guests. I love all of you. Mwah, mwah, for participating today and taking time from your families to be part of this conversation. And I want to thank all of our production team behind the scenes, because there are a few that make this happen. We don't do this alone. It takes all of us together to provide this content. And let's move over to Stephen. And then I'll come back on. Shauna and I will come back on. Stephen?
Yeah.
We're moving over to you.
Okay.
Would you like to recite your lyric? That is so beautiful. Stephen shared this with me the other day, and a request of his daughter, Shauna. So I'd love for all of you to hear it.
Before I do, let me thank you for this opportunity to present and to be able to be part of this very important dialogue and discussion. And I look forward to further opportunities. And I also want to say that although it's true that there is this incarceration metaphor that we can use and think about the situation of our nations and peoples, the domination system and all that, the most important thing is to remember that we do have an original, free and independent existence that we have to always think upon and acknowledge that the ancestors bequeathed to us, left to us, all of the developments that they put into effect, all of the language and understandings and the wisdom, and within our languages are embedded so many important ideas and concepts about life and the love of life and the deep appreciation of life, and to realize that the goal should be the beautification of life. And so the lyric is Turtle Island Nations. We are the Turtle Island nations, praying for all our relations, entirely free originally, forever that way we shall rightfully be, rejecting claim discovery. They say they discovered our lands and our lives. We all know that's nothing but lies with a colonial design to dehumanize. You can't discover another nation's home with permission from a pope in Rome and rightfully impose a Capitol dome. Kings, queens, potentates, bearing symbols of church and state, claimed a right to dominate. Their ancestors sailed under color of God, divine right to take that was nothing but fraud. We're sustained by our spirituality and our abiding reality. So they've tried to destroy our sacred sites and ceremonial places, but we've held tight. They're never going to erase us from this blue orb of day and night with living waters and sunlight. We pray for all the elements of life. We are the Buffalo Nations, praying for all our relations, entirely free originally, forever that way we shall rightfully be, rejecting assumed superiority. We know water is life for everyone. Decolonize your mind.
Wow. I'm giving that a moment to let that sink in.
You know, our great leader Tecumseh, he gave many speeches, and his goal, his vision was to unify all Native nations in common cause against a common foe. And at that time, it was understood, the common foe was understood in a certain manner. The way I understand that common foe today is the domination dehumanization system. And if I may, if I have just a minute or so, is there maybe a couple minutes to do a final recounting of one of his speeches? He would say, "Before me stand the rightful owners of this beautiful land. The Great Spirit in his wisdom placed you here and gave it to you and your children to defend. But alas, the incoming race, like a huge snake, is coiling closer and closer about you. And not content with hemming you in on every side, they have built at Chicago, in the very center of our country, a military fort garrisoned with soldiers, ready and equipped for battle. As sure as the heavens are above, they are determined to take this good land for themselves and to destroy these forests. If you doubt it, come, go with me eastward or southward along our ancient trails, and I will show you a land you once occupied made desolate. There the forests of untold years have been cut down and cast into the fire. There the woodland birds whose sweet songs once pleased your ears have forsaken the land. There the buffalo and deer, the fish and the fowl are all gone. There the wild flowers your maidens once loved to wear have withered and died. Beware of them, for they love gold and greed more than one another, even their own souls." And so that was recounted by Simon Pokagon, whose father had heard the speeches of Tecumseh when he was a young man. And he told those speeches as an oral tradition in their family. And Simon Pokagon published that in 1899. I believe it was in Harper's Magazine. And I stumbled across that when I was doing research on the Kanaka Maoli people and the illegal overthrow of their queen and the takeover of their country. So thank you for that.
Yes. Thank you, Stephen. You know, RNCI, Red Nation Celebration Institute, was also founded on bringing all of us together, the foundation of community and uniting all of us. And when we first launched it, a few said, you know, that's an impossible task. But you know what? I believe in it still today, and I think it can happen, and it is happening. With conversations like this, it can happen sooner than later. Again, Shauna, Stephen, Jode, Eric, and Crystal, thank you again for your precious energy and your time today. In policed since 1492 incarceration of Native nations. And we'll see you next month on September 14th. And that theme is going to be Native Women in Film, Why We Wear Red. And we will be addressing many topics on murdered and Indigenous women, the exclusion of Native women on television and in film and in executive positions, and just a whole bunch of stuff. So that's going to be a whole different conversation. So anyway, again, thank you. And we'll see you again September 14th. Bye, everyone.